Some stories should have been buried with the dead. But the earth, it never keeps its secrets for long. The year is 1861. The state of Alabama trembles on the edge of war. But in the town of Montgomery, another kind of war is whispered about, a war not of nations, but of blood. Two sisters were born under a single scream, a single breath, a single heartbeat. The Holloway twins. Locals claim they weren't two lives at all, just one soul, split and screaming inside two bodies. And when one smiled, the other bled. When one slept, the other awoke screaming. The midwife who delivered them swore she heard two voices cry out, but only one sound. She left town that same night, refusing ever to speak their names again. Before I go further, I need to ask you something. If you want to hear the truths no one else dares to whisper, the kinds of stories that stain your thoughts and burn themselves into your memory, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks they can handle the truth. And I want to know, where are you watching this from? Write your city in the comments below, because I want to see just how far this forbidden knowledge spreads. The Holloway family tried to hide them. They shuttered their windows. They told the town the twins were sickly and best left alone. But people talk, and the whispers grew darker. Farmers swore that every crop that grew within sight of their home withered before harvest. Children claimed to hear laughter echoing from the woods at night, though no child ever dared to play there. And then there was the preacher's wife, who swore, after a single visit, that the girls' eyes moved together as one, even when one looked left and the other looked right. She said it was like watching a reflection in broken glass. But the true horror came later, when one twin found love and the other found blood. And this is where their story changes from strange whispers to something darker, something that still stains the ground of Montgomery to this very day. Because when the Holloway twins grew into women, they discovered something more terrifying than death itself, what it means to share one soul and one murder. The Holloway girls were beautiful in a way that made people uneasy. Not the kind of beauty you praise, but the kind you fear. Pale, with eyes too deep for their age, and voices that seemed to echo each other even when they spoke alone. Neighbors said when you spoke to one, the other would answer in her sleep. When Clara Holloway wept, her sister Eliza laughed, always without fail, as though joy and sorrow had been split between them like property in a will. By the time they turned 16, the townsfolk had stopped calling them girls at all. They whispered witches. They whispered demons. And yet, there was something magnetic about them. The very same neighbors who cursed their name found themselves unable to look away, like moths circling a lantern that only burns to kill. And then came the first suitor. His name was Jonathan Pike, a farmhand son, young, strong, with hands used to labor and eyes too naive to notice danger. He fell for Clara first. She smiled at him in the marketplace one afternoon, and that was enough. He told his friends she had the face of an angel. But when he spoke of her beauty, Eliza's hand shook. When he kissed Clara's hand in secret, Eliza woke in the night with a bruise forming on her skin, though no one had touched her. The bond between them wasn't sisterhood. It was prison. Every wound one suffered, the other bore. Every desire one felt, the other resisted. Jonathan had no idea he was courting not one woman, but two, bound in ways he could never understand. The more Jonathan loved Clara, the more Eliza unraveled. She accused her sister of theft, not of objects, but of existence itself. Clara's joy became her torment. Clara's love became her rage. And the rage grew until it spilled over, like water rising against a broken dam. One night, Clara returned home with flowers in her hair, Jonathan's gift. Eliza stood waiting in the dark. The candles were unlit. The air was cold, and she spoke words that would echo for generations. If you take him, you take me. And if you kill me, you kill us both. What happened next is the reason their story is whispered in Montgomery graveyards even today. Because that night, only one twin left the Holloway home alive. And some still swear it wasn't the right one. The town awoke to silence. The Holloway house sat still, its windows boarded, its chimney, smoke absent. But by midday, rumors spread like fire in dry fields. one of the twins was dead. Yet no coffin was carried. No priest was summoned. No funeral bell tolled. The Holloway parents, stern, hollow-eyed, and already shunned by their neighbors, said nothing. And that silence was louder than any scream. Jonathan Pike was the first to notice something was wrong. Clara had promised to meet him beneath the oak tree that morning. She never came. When he approached the Holloway home, Eliza greeted him instead. Her eyes seemed softer now, less cruel, almost tender. She claimed Clara was ill, too weak to see him. But when Jonathan insisted, when he demanded to hear her voice, Eliza placed a trembling hand on his chest and whispered, "You already are." Jonathan left, confused, uneasy. But later that night, he returned again, and this time Clara greeted him at the door. She was pale, dazed, and her movements seemed unnatural, as though every step was borrowed, every breath rehearsed. She clutched his hand, but Jonathan swore it was colder than the autumn air around them. The town began to notice strange changes. Where once the sisters moved like reflections, they no longer did. Clara would answer questions before they were asked. Eliza, once sharp-tongued and bitter, now stared blankly at people, as though listening to voices they could not hear. The preacher's wife, who had sworn never to return to that cursed home, broke her vow. She claimed she had been woken in the night by a dream of two faces merging into one. She arrived at the Holloway doorstep, demanded to see both sisters, and was turned away. But as she left, she swore she heard laughter, two distinct voices, yet coming from the same throat. Soon, livestock in the fields near the Holloway farm were found mutilated, yet no predator left tracks. And always the twins were blamed. Only now, no one seemed certain which one remained. Clara? Eliza? Or some unholy union of the two? Jonathan wrestled with doubt. He swore he could feel Clara's love in Eliza's gaze. And sometimes, when he touched Clara's hand, he felt the sting of Eliza's anger. The town asked questions no one dared voice aloud. If one twin had truly died, then why did both shadows still move across the window glass at night? Whispers turned into fear, and fear turned into watchfulness. By the winter of 1861, the Holloway farm was no longer just a house at the edge of town. It was a wound on the land itself. Neighbors swore they saw flickering candlelight in the windows at hours when no family should be awake. Others claimed the twins' mother wandered into town with scratches down her arms, her eyes wild, muttering of dreams she could not escape. She said the girls were fighting over something greater than a man, that one sought to live while the other demanded to be remembered. Jonathan Pike, caught in the storm, grew restless. He loved Clara, at least he thought he did, but her behavior twisted day by day. At times she was radiant, clinging to him with warmth that made him forget the dread in his heart. At other times her smile stretched too long, her laugh broke into sobs, and her eyes darkened until he swore it was Eliza staring at him through her face. The more he tried to leave, the more she held him, and he felt something terrible, not just love, but possession. One evening, after leaving the Holloway home, Jonathan returned to find his family's barn ablaze. The flames devoured wood and hay alike, but when the fire was quenched, no tracks were found around the ash. Only two sets of footprints led away into the woods, bare feet, side by side, pressing deep into the earth as if the soil itself strained to hold them. The townsfolk could no longer bear their silence. A council gathered, demanding answers. But when they pressed the Holloway parents, the father shook his head and muttered, "One daughter is dead, and yet she walks." No more would be said. That night, the preacher ordered a vigil outside the Holloway home. Lanterns were lit, prayers muttered. But those who kept watch swore they saw something far worse than witches. Through the crack of the shuttered windows, they saw two faces pressed against the glass, one smiling, one weeping, both staring directly at them. The men of Montgomery argued what to do: burn the house, drag the twins into the church, or leave them be and hope God himself intervened. But Jonathan Pike, consumed by guilt and love in equal measure, made his choice. He would enter the Holloway home alone, and when he crossed that threshold, he found the truth of the twins waiting in the dark. The Holloway home was silent when Jonathan Pike stepped inside. The vigil outside had scattered. No man had the courage to follow him. Only the creak of the door, the slow groan of the floorboards, and the weight of his own breath marked his entry. The air smelled of wax and iron. The curtains were drawn so tightly that the house seemed swallowed by night. His lantern flickered, its flame restless, as though it too wished to flee. He called out softly, "Clara?" No answer. He stepped deeper, passing the parlor where portraits of the family hung crooked on the wall. The faces were stern, painted in oil long before the twins' birth. Yet Jonathan swore that in the shifting lantern light, one portrait of the girls seemed wrong. Where once two smiling children had stood side by side, now one appeared blurred, almost erased, as if the canvas itself had grown confused about who remained alive. A sound broke the silence, a soft humming, a lullaby. He followed it to the stairwell, and there she was, Clara, sitting on the steps in a white dress, her hair tangled, her eyes vacant. She rocked back and forth, whispering a tune her mother had once sung. When she looked up at him, she smiled faintly, but her lips moved slower than the voice he heard. Because as her mouth closed, the lullaby continued. Jonathan froze. The sound wasn't coming from Clara at all. It was coming from upstairs. Eliza's voice. The air thickened. Clara reached out her hand, fingers trembling. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her tone flat, lifeless. Jonathan ignored her warning and ascended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar. Inside, the glow of candlelight quivered against the walls. He pushed it open and saw what no man in Montgomery would ever speak of aloud. Two beds stood side by side. One lay empty, its sheets untouched. The other, its mattress was stained, the shape of a body still pressed into it. And sitting at the edge of that bed was Eliza, or what remained of her. Her eyes opened slowly, staring at him, but her body did not move. Her lips parted, and, with Clara's same voice, she said, "You love me still, don't you?" Jonathan dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room, and in that blackness, two voices began to laugh. The lantern shattered against the floorboards, its light snuffed as though swallowed whole. Jonathan Pike's breath quickened, chest hammering against the silence. The room smelled of smoke and melted wax, but underneath it, a copper tang, unmistakable. Blood. He stumbled back, trying to find the door, but the darkness was alive. Soft footsteps circled him, though he could see nothing. Then a hand grazed his shoulder, cold, too cold to be Clara's. He spun, searching, whispering her name like a prayer. "Clara? Eliza?" His voice cracked. A whisper slid against his ear. "Both." He lurched away, and in a flicker of lightning through the window, he saw them. Two figures, both in white dresses, both with tangled hair. But their faces shifted. One moment Clara's gentle eyes, the next Eliza's smoldering glare. And sometimes both layered atop each other, like two images burned into the same photograph. Jonathan's knees weakened. "This isn't real," he gasped. "One of you is gone." Their voices answered in unison, overlapping but not identical, like two instruments playing the same melody at once. When one is gone, the other becomes whole. He felt the floor tilt beneath him, though the house stood firm. His mind reeled. Was he speaking to Clara alive, Eliza dead, or both fused in some nightmare union? The sisters stepped closer. Every time his eyes blinked, their forms shifted, sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes neither. His fear turned to dread when he realized they weren't approaching him. They were surrounding him. He reached for the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The candlelight snuffed itself out. Total black. And then came the sound. Not a laugh this time, not a song, but something worse. A low, guttural moan, rising and falling as though dragged from a throat, not meant to speak. Jonathan clutched his ears, but it wasn't entering through sound. It was inside his skull. Clara's voice screamed, "Leave us." Eliza's voice followed, "Stay forever." The two collided, echoing until his sanity cracked like glass. Jonathan collapsed to his knees, sobbing, as two sets of hands pressed down on his shoulders. When his vision cleared, he realized something that froze his blood solid. Both hands belonged to the same body. Jonathan Pike's scream died in his throat. Two hands, firm, cold, heavy on his shoulders. Yet when he looked up, only one figure loomed before him. Her face shimmered in the candle's dying glow, shifting in impossible ways. The jawline of Clara, the cheekbones of Eliza, the eyes of both. It was as though his mind couldn't decide which sister stood before him. Or worse, as though the sisters had decided for themselves that there would be no separation. Jonathan staggered back, pressing against the wall. The boards were damp. When he pulled his hand away, it glistened red. His palm smeared blood down his trousers. He whispered to himself, trembling, "I must be dreaming. I must." The figure moved closer. Its lips parted, but two voices came from its throat at once. Clara's pleading softness, Eliza's sharp defiance. Dreams are just the places we hide the truth. Jonathan bolted toward the door, wrenching at the knob until his knuckles split. The latch gave way, and he spilled out into the hallway, tripping over himself. Behind him, the figure followed, slow, deliberate, as though savoring his terror. The house itself seemed to change around him. Corridors stretched longer than they should. Doors led to rooms that had never existed. Portraits lining the walls blurred, their painted faces watching him with suspicion, as if they too had been witnesses to the Holloway curse. He stumbled into the parlor. His lantern was gone. Only moonlight leaked through a crack in the shuttered window. He gasped for breath, clutching the mantel, staring at the hearth where the ashes of old fires rested. Then he heard it again, the laughter, but this time not distant. It came from the fireplace itself, like smoke given voice. Jonathan fell to his knees, clutching his head. "Stop it," he cried. "Please, tell me which of you still lives." The room went still, and then, soft as the rustling of silk, a reply. From behind him. "Both." He turned slowly. There, standing in the doorway, was Clara. Pale, serene, as if nothing had happened. But when she stepped into the moonlight, a second shadow moved with hers. Longer, thinner, not hers at all. Jonathan's breath caught in his chest. Shadows do not lie. A man may wear a mask, a woman may feign a smile, but the shadow tells the truth. And Clara's shadow was not her own. It stretched long across the floorboards, twisted thin like a body half-starved, its arms too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. While Clara stood calm, her hands folded in front of her dress, the shadow writhed and reached toward him, fingers clawing for his throat. Jonathan staggered back, crossing himself in desperation. "God help me," he whispered. Clara tilted her head, her eyes soft. But the shadow tilted the opposite way, its grin wide, teeth jagged in the moonlight. And when Clara spoke, Jonathan heard the layered tones again. Hers gentle, Eliza's cruel, woven together like strands of a rope tightening around his neck. "God does not live here anymore." The words dropped like lead. Jonathan backed against the mantel, his hand brushing against the iron poker. His trembling fingers closed around it, raising it as though a weapon could fend off whatever horror he faced. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why do you fear me?" she asked, her voice breaking. But the shadow answered for her, its mouth opening wider, wider, until it split across its face. "Because he knows which one of us died." Jonathan's heart nearly gave out. He swung the poker wildly, striking the floor, the wall, anything to banish the vision. Sparks of plaster and would burst into the air, but Clara only flinched, while the shadow laughed, its movements mocking his every strike. Finally, he collapsed to his knees, choking on his own sobs. The poker fell from his hand, clattering uselessly on the boards. Clara knelt with him, cradling his face between her soft, shaking palms. "Jonathan," she whispered, "I love you. You must believe that." Her tears streaked his cheeks. But when he dared open his eyes, he saw the truth. The hands touching him were not both hers. One was smooth and warm, the other cold, stiff, marked with the rot of a body long buried. Jonathan screamed, and in that scream, Clara's face faltered, her features shifting, flickering between her own and her sister's, until finally, both sisters' mouths moved in unison, whispering a secret that no man should ever hear. We share one soul, and it is not enough. Jonathan Pike stumbled out of the Holloway home before dawn, his clothes torn, his eyes wide with madness. The vigil had long since broken. The men of Montgomery had abandoned their posts in cowardice, leaving only silence in the fields. He collapsed in the dirt road, clawing at the earth as though trying to bury what he had seen. When a passing farmer found him, Jonathan's mouth was foaming, his voice broken into fragments. He repeated the same words again and again, his lips trembling, eyes darting as though unseen hands still clutched him. Two shadows, one body, one soul, one soul, one soul. By the time they dragged him into town, he was raving, incoherent. But the townsfolk listened, and fear spread faster than fire. The Holloway house became cursed ground. Children were forbidden to walk its lane. Men carried crosses when they passed. Women whispered that Clara and Eliza had made a pact, that one had bargained her sister's life for her own, and when death came to collect, the debt could not be settled. Some claimed Clara was alive and Eliza dead. Others claimed the opposite. But the most terrifying whisper was the one spoken only in hushed tones behind locked doors, that both were neither dead nor alive, but something in between. Livestock continued to turn up mutilated. Fields near the Holloway farm yielded nothing but rot. And the preacher himself began to waste away, his sermons growing fevered, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the good book. He confessed to his wife one night that every time he closed his eyes, he saw two women standing at the foot of his bed, arguing over who should be allowed to speak through his mouth. Jonathan, meanwhile, had not recovered. He refused to eat, refused to sleep, only staring blankly at the church ceiling where he had been taken for refuge. On his chest, he carved lines with his own fingernails, two lines always side by side. When the preacher's wife asked him what they meant, he answered with a voice not his own. One grave, two bodies, one soul, none free. The town now faced a terrible question. If one Holloway twin had murdered the other, then justice demanded punishment. But if both still walked the earth, bound, cursed, and unholy, what punishment could even touch them? The council gathered to decide. But that very night, the Holloway parents disappeared. The disappearance of the Holloway parents broke what little restraint remained in Montgomery. Fear had matured into rage, and rage demanded action. The council declared what no man had dared say aloud until that night. The Holloway home must be entered, its daughters brought forth, and judgment rendered before God and man. The men gathered torches and rifles. Women stood in the streets, clutching their children, whispering prayers in a hair damp with fear. No one doubted that what dwelled inside that house was not of this world. Yet they convinced themselves that fire and bullets might succeed where faith had failed. At dusk, 20 men marched up the lane. The shutters of the Holloway home were closed, but a faint glow pulsed within, like embers breathing beneath ash. As the mob approached, silence thickened. Even the crickets refused to sing. The preacher, gaunt and trembling, raised his hand to knock upon the door. But before his knuckles touched the wood, it opened on its own. Clara stood there, alone, dressed in white, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. She smiled faintly, and in that smile, every man felt his stomach twist. It was not the smile of welcome, but of recognition, as if she had been expecting them all along. "Where are your parents?" demanded the blacksmith, his voice firm though his hand shook. Clara tilted her head. "They are with Eliza," she answered softly. Her eyes glimmered. "And Eliza is with me." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Still, they pressed inside. The parlor smelled of wax and decay. The portraits on the walls had changed again. Faces smeared, eyes blurred, as though the house itself refused to remember its own family. The preacher clutched his Bible tighter, reading aloud a passage of exorcism. Clara only laughed, a gentle sound that made the torches flicker. And then it happened. From upstairs, a door slammed. Heavy footsteps descended, though no figure could be seen. The sound of a second presence filled the house. Jonathan Pike, still half-mad, shrieked from the back of the group. "She's here! She's here!" Both of them. The torches flared, smoke choking the room. Clara's shadow stretched against the wall, but it did not move with her body. It moved on its own. The men froze in terror as the shadow stepped forward, separating from Clara entirely. And standing before them was Eliza. The men staggered back, their rifles clutched but useless, torches trembling in sweaty hands. Before them, Eliza Holloway stood as if she had been born from darkness itself. Her figure was solid now, no longer a shadow, no longer half-seen. Her skin pale as bone, her eyes sharp and burning with something that was not human hunger, but something deeper, envy. Clara remained at the doorway, her face serene, lips parted as though she wished to speak. But no sound came. Instead, Eliza advanced, each step echoing louder than the last. The floorboards moaned under her weight, though she looked thin enough to vanish with the next gust of air. The blacksmith, shaking, raised his rifle. "Stay back," he warned. "In the name of God, stay back." Eliza smiled, her teeth too white, too perfect. "God has not been here since the night I died." She lifted her hand, and the torches guttered. Darkness swallowed the parlor. The men cursed, rifles scraping against what as panic seized them. In the suffocating black, voices rose, one pleading, one mocking. Clara begging for peace, Eliza whispering for blood. When the torches sputtered back to life, Eliza stood at the center of the room. Her hand was pressed to Jonathan Pike's chest. His eyes rolled white, his mouth slack, his body trembling like a man being drained of breath. The preacher charged forward, slamming his Bible open. He read aloud, his voice cracking, commanding the demon to depart. But Eliza only turned her gaze on him, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you even know who you pray to, preacher? He takes sides. He always takes sides, and he has chosen hers." She pointed to Clara. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, Eliza, it isn't true." But the men saw it. The way her shadow trembled and bent toward her sister, as if torn between merging and breaking apart forever. Jonathan dropped to the floor, gasping, clutching his chest. His fingernails were red where he had scratched 2 lines into his skin. The same 2 lines he had carved before. The blacksmith fired his rifle. The shot cracked through the house like thunder. Smoke burned the air, but when the haze cleared, Eliza was gone. Only Clara remained, and yet 2 shadows stretched behind her. The gunshots still rang in the ears of every man present, but silence pressed heavier than the smoke. Clara stood motionless at the center of the room, her dress unstained, her chest unbroken. And yet, the shadows trailing behind her told a different story. 2 silhouettes writhing, overlapping, as though trapped in a silent struggle. The blacksmith dropped his rifle. His lips moved, but no words came. Around him, the others shifted uneasily, their courage already crumbling. They had marched to this house armed with fire and steel, and yet both had proven powerless. The preacher, pale and shaking, whispered, "This is not flesh. This is covenant." Clara's eyes snapped to him. For the first time, her face twisted, not with sadness, but with fury. Her voice, split in 2, lashed across the room. "Do not speak of what you do not understand." The torches flared violently, burning higher as if fed by unseen breath. Their flames bent inward, toward Clara, casting her in a crown of firelight. Behind her, Eliza's shadow surged forward, clawing at the floor, straining against invisible chains. Jonathan Pike, still gasping on the floorboards, croaked out one broken plea. It'd end her, but Clara fell to her knees beside him, stroking his hair with tenderness. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not the one who holds her. She holds me." Her words struck the men like hammer blows. They realized, with dread gnawing their hearts, that Clara was no longer merely a victim. She was the vessel. Eliza's will lived inside her, feeding, festering, twisting her blood and breath until the line between them no longer existed. The blacksmith stumbled backward, muttering prayers, his face slick with sweat. "Burn the house," he cried. "Burn it to the ground before it spreads." But as he spoke, the shadows shifted. One of them detached entirely from Clara and slid across the floor like spilled ink. It curled up the blacksmith's leg, wrapping around his torso, squeezing until he dropped to his knees with a strangled cry. The others rushed to pull him free, but there was nothing to grasp. The shadow sank into his chest, vanishing inside him. When he lifted his head, his eyes were not his own. One glimmered like Clara's. The other smoldered like Eliza's. And in a voice not his own, he spoke the words no man should ever utter. "The soul is not bound by one body. It is hunger. It must spread." The blacksmith's voice chilled every man in that room. They had come to drag two young women into judgment, and instead they were staring into the jaws of something ancient, something parasitic, something hungry. He stood slowly, his frame rigid, as though a new will had taken root inside his bones. His lips quivered between smiles and grimaces, as if two faces warred for control. When he spoke again, it was not just his mouth that moved. Clara's lips shifted with his, Eliza's shadow mimicked his words. "One soul, many vessels." The preacher dropped his Bible. Pages fluttered loose like panicked birds, scattering across the blood-stained floor. He stammered prayers, but the words fell hollow, lifeless. Even God seemed absent. Jonathan Pike clutched the hearth, dragging himself upright. His voice was hoarse, but his words cut sharper than any blade. "It's not the girls. It's the soul. It's what was split." The townsman backed away from the blacksmith as his hands clawed at his own chest. His nails dug until skin tore, yet no blood spilled. Only darkness seeped from the wounds, curling upward like smoke. The air thickened, hard to breathe, a suffocating fog of whispers. Clara screamed, not with fear, but with grief. "Stop," she begged. "She isn't meant for you." She staggered toward the blacksmith, hands trembling as though she might pull the sickness back into herself. But Eliza's shadow surged first. It slithered across the walls, the ceiling, and into the faces of every man in the room. Their eyes rolled white, their mouths dropped open, and in unison they began to chant, "One soul, one soul, one soul." Jonathan fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The preacher vomited blood onto the floorboards, his prayers replaced by that same chant, echoing through his ruined throat. Clara spun in circles, desperate, horrified. She pressed her palms against her ears, screaming, "She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to me." But Eliza's laughter filled the room, high, sharp, and merciless. "I belong to whoever carries me." The torches extinguished. The house plunged into black. And when the men staggered out into the night, their faces pale, their voices empty, Montgomery knew the curse was no longer confined to the Holloway home. It had stepped across the threshold. By morning, Montgomery was no longer the same town. What had once been whispers and superstition became raw terror. The men who had entered the Holloway house staggered back into the streets like corpses still walking, eyes glazed, lips cracked, muttering the same chant over and over. "One soul, one soul, one soul." Their wives dragged them into homes, splashing them with water, forcing food into their mouths. But nothing broke the trance. At night, the afflicted men rose from their beds and wandered the streets, barefoot, aimless, their shadows stretching too long beneath the moon. Children wept as they watched fathers and uncles march silently past, their mouths moving without sound. The preacher locked himself inside the church, refusing visitors. But the bells tolled at random hours, deep into the night. Some swore they saw two figures at the belfry window, one in white, one in black, ringing the bells with unseen hands. Jonathan Pike, half mad and broken, tried to warn the town. He claimed Eliza was no ghost, no demon, but a parasite, an unfinished soul clawing for wholeness, spreading through any vessel that opened itself in fear or weakness. No one listened. Some mocked him. Others cursed him. But then the sickness spread further. A child in the market was found mumbling to herself, her voice too deep, too old. She carved 2 lines into the dirt with her finger again and again, whispering, "Two made one. Two made one." An old woman collapsed in her doorway, clutching her chest, her eyes wide and unblinking. When her neighbors lifted her, she shrieked in a voice not her own, "I am not hers alone. I am all of yours." Panic erupted. Families barricaded doors. Crops were left to rot in the fields. The town square emptied. Montgomery began to starve, not from lack of food, but from fear. No one trusted their neighbor. Because how could you? If one soul could stretch between bodies, whose eyes were truly their own. One night, a mob gathered again. Torches lit, hammers raised. They marched not only to the Holloway farm, but to the homes of those believed to be touched. Neighbors dragged neighbors into the street. Men accused their wives. Parents accused their children. The chant spread like a fever. And in the chaos, Clara appeared at the edge of the square. She stood calm, her white dress torn, her hair wild, her lips trembling. And 2 shadows stretched behind her, swaying in opposite directions. The square was a storm of firelight and fury. Torches hissed in the night air, pitchforks and rifles raised high, faces twisted with terror pretending to be courage. But when Clara stepped into view, silence fell. She looked fragile, broken, her bare feet blackened by dirt, her dress clinging in tatters. Her eyes brimmed with tears. To some, she seemed a victim. To others, the root of the curse itself. And when her shadows writhed behind her, swaying like tethered serpents, the silence shattered into screams. The blacksmith, still possessed, shoved his way forward. His mouth curled into a smile too wide, too knowing. "She carries her," he told them. "She is the vessel. Strike her down, and the soul scatters." The mob roared agreement. Torches surged higher. But Clara raised her hands, her voice cracking. "Please listen to me. She is not me. She is inside me. If you kill me, you kill yourselves too. She has already touched you. You feel her, don't you? In your dreams. In your hearts." Murmurs spread. Some men faltered, their faces paling as they remembered the strange whispers in their sleep, the moments when their own reflections seemed to move without them. But then another voice answered. Not from Clara's mouth, not from the crowd, but from everywhere at once. "Eliza, they are mine already." The mob stiffened, their torches flickering as though the fire itself bent to her words. Women screamed as their husbands' shadows split across the ground, lengthening, duplicating, writhing. Some shadows even lifted from the dirt, bending upward like smoke-given flesh. The preacher stumbled out from the church, his face gaunt, his eyes rimmed with black. He held his Bible high, pages torn and blood-stained, shouting, "She is legion. She is the devil's bride. Strike her down before we are all damned." The mob surged toward Clara. Stones flew. A torch landed at her feet, flames licking her dress. She cried out, staggering backward. And then her voice broke, shifting, splitting. Her mouth moved, but Eliza's words poured out, sharp as broken glass. "You cannot burn what is already ash." The torch in her dress extinguished itself, smoldering to black. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara fell to her knees, sobbing. But Eliza's laughter echoed across every throat in the square, the mob's own voices betraying them. One soul, 1,000 mouths. The mob's roar shook the night, but Clara heard nothing. Only the thundering of her own heart, a pulse that no longer felt like hers. She stood trembling in the firelight, her eyes darting from face to face. Neighbors she had known since childhood now stared at her like executioners, their mouths twitching with words they did not choose. One soul. One soul. One soul. Eliza's shadow clung to Clara's back, longer, darker, thicker than before. Each time she inhaled, the crowd exhaled in unison, as though she were their lungs. Each time she blinked, Their eyes fluttered closed. Eliza had spread too far. The town was not merely haunted, it was possessed. Clara screamed. This is not what she wanted. But her own voice betrayed her, splitting in two. Her lips trembled as Eliza's tone bled through her own. This is what I have always wanted. Jonathan Pike staggered into the square, bleeding, coughing, eyes sunken with terror. He thrust a trembling hand toward her. Clara, listen to me. You can't separate from her anymore. The bond is sealed. You must end it, or she will wear all of Montgomery as her skin. The mob surged, some collapsing to their knees as if puppets cut from strings, others clawing at their faces as though to rip the Holloway soul out by force. Shadows split and merged in the firelight, stretching into shapes too tall, too wide, too human to belong. Clara clutched her chest. She could feel Eliza's heartbeat pulsing inside her ribcage. It wasn't hers. It was heavier, older wrong. Tears poured down her cheeks as she whispered, I don't want this anymore. Eliza's laughter echoed through every throat in the square. Then give yourself to me completely. Something inside Clara broke. Her scream tore through the night as she seized a jagged shard of glass from the ground. Without hesitation, she pressed it to her chest. Gasps erupted, but she didn't waver. With one brutal motion, she carved a burning line across her breastbone. Blood spilled hot and fast. Her knees buckled, and then, before the crowd could move, she cut a second line, crossing the first. A cross, an unmaking. She fell to the dirt, arms spread wide. The wound glowed like fire. The mob stopped breathing. Shadows convulsed as if strangled by unseen chains. And then the voice that came from her lips was not Clara's. It was Eliza's, stronger than ever. At last, all of me. The square had become a tomb. No one moved. No one breathed. All eyes locked on Clara's body, splayed in the dirt, blood glistening in the torchlight. But the glow beneath her skin had not faded. It spread, pulsing in crimson waves up her throat, across her face, through her arms. Then Clara stood, not with the trembling weakness of a dying girl, but with a calm, deliberate grace. Her back straightened, her head tilted with sharp precision. When she lifted her eyes to the crowd, they no longer shimmered with grief. They burned, cold, black, endless. The mob staggered back. Mothers clutched their children. The preacher dropped his Bible and fell to his knees, muttering prayers that tangled into nonsense. Clara's lips parted, but the voice that slipped through was smooth, venomous, triumphant. She is gone. I am whole. A ripple went through the crowd. Men clutching their chests, women gasping as though their lungs collapsed, children screaming without knowing why. Shadows stretched again, longer than the torches could explain, each twisting and breaking into shapes that didn't belong to their owners. Jonathan Pike, shaking, raised his cane like a weapon. You are not her, he spat, his voice breaking. You're a parasite, a curse. You are her like skin, but you will never, never be her. Eliza tilted her head, smiling with Clara's lips. She stepped toward him, barefoot, her blood trailing in the dirt like ink. Jonathan, she purred, her voice echoing from every direction, you have carried me longer than you realize. His cane slipped from his fingers. His eyes rolled back white. His mouth opened, and Eliza's laughter poured from him, perfectly mirrored, perfectly synchronized with hers. The crowd screamed, scattering, but no matter which way they turned, her voice followed. It was in the air, in their ears, in their own throats. Clara's hands lifted skyward, trembling not with weakness but with hunger. The torches sputtered and died, plunging Montgomery into darkness. Only the glow from her wounds lit the square, a crimson cross blazing on her chest. And then she spoke words no one forgot. You cannot kill me. I'm already you. The crowd broke into chaos. Families turning on each other, men clawing at their skin, women wailing as though their children were no longer theirs. Montgomery had tried to kill the Holloway curse. Instead, they had given it flesh. The streets of Montgomery bled with panic. Men stumbled through the alleys, their shadows twitching like broken marionettes. Women clutched their children, but some found only silence in their arms. The infant stiff, eyes wide, lips moving to whispers too old to belong in a child's mouth. And in the center of it all, Clara's body, now fully Eliza's throne, moved through the square with a grace that paralyzed every witness. The cross carved into her chest glowed like molten iron, and with each step she took, doors unlatched, shutters flew open, and lamps dimmed as though the town itself bowed to her presence. The preacher tried once more to resist. With shaking hands, he clutched his ruined Bible and lifted his voice in a guttural shout. "Begone, spirit of division!" Eliza stopped. Her head turned, her eyes bottomless. And then she opened Clara's mouth and spoke with a voice layered in thousands. Man, woman, child, all woven into one. Division? No, preacher. I am union. I am what you fear most. A soul too whole to be broken. The preacher screamed as his body twisted unnaturally. Bones cracked, his shadow split into two, then three, before collapsing into a heap at her feet. Lifeless, but still whispering one soul, one soul, one soul. The mob scattered into houses, into fields, into the riverbanks. But wherever they fled, they found her there already. A glimpse in a window, a reflection in the water, a breath in their ear as they prayed in secret. Eliza no longer needed the Holloway house. She no longer needed shadows. She was Montgomery now. Jonathan Pike, writhing in the dirt, stared at her with wild eyes. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You've damned us all." Clara's lips curled into something not human, a smile too patient, too eternal. She crouched beside him, brushing his hair with hands now steady, no longer trembling with grief. "Jonathan," she whispered, her tone almost tender, "you mistake damnation for revelation. I'm not here to end Montgomery. I am here to make it mine." Her bloodied hand pressed to his chest. He convulsed, gasping. His pupils widened, swallowing his eyes whole. And when his lips parted, his voice matched hers perfectly. One soul. Montgomery's last skeptic was gone. The town had birthed its new god. By the third night, Montgomery no longer resembled a town. The streets, once filled with wagons and markets, were eerily empty, save for the slow procession of men and women walking in silence. No one carried tools or goods anymore. They carried candles, hundreds of them, burning steadily though no wax dripped, as if the flames obeyed Eliza's will. At the center of the square stood Clara's body, veiled in crimson light. The cross carved into her chest had scarred over, but instead of healing, the wound pulsed, black veins spreading outward like the roots of a tree, creeping up her throat, down her arms, across her belly. Those who gazed too long swore the veins writhed like serpents. No one dared call her Clara anymore. To speak that name was to invite her gaze, and no one survived her gaze. She was simply her. The preacher's church had been stripped bare. Its pews, pulpit, even its cross torn down and burned. In its place stood a hollow frame of blackened wood, encircling Clara like a shrine. The townsfolk bowed as they entered, whispering their confessions not to God, but to Eliza, who listened through Clara's lips with unnerving patience. Children were the first to change. Their laughter vanished, replaced by chants. They would gather in circles, scratching symbols into the dirt with their fingernails, murmuring in unison, "One soul, one soul, one soul." Their parents watched in silence, as if powerless to stop them, or worse, unwilling. At night, the river glowed faintly red, reflecting the scar carved into Clara's chest. Fishermen swore they saw faces in the water, faces that weren't their own, but family long dead. Some claimed the Holloway girls themselves could be seen beneath the ripples, locked in embrace, smiling as though Montgomery's suffering was a wedding feast. Jonathan Pike, no longer entirely himself, wandered the streets as Eliza's mouthpiece, delivering her decrees. No family, no division, no separate blood. All belonged to her. Those who resisted vanished before dawn, their shadows lingering a day longer than their bodies. And still, Clara's body stood tireless in the square, the shrine and the weapon, the face, and the mask. The girl who once begged to be free was gone, swallowed whole. What remained was the gospel of one soul, written not in scripture, but in blood. Not everyone in Montgomery bent the knee. In the shadows, a small resistance stirred. Broken men and women who remembered what life was before the Holloway curse swallowed their town. They met in silence, in the hushed corners of barns, in cellars lit by lanterns smothered with cloth, their voices trembling with both fear and rage. At the center of this trembling circle stood Margaret Hale, the blacksmith's widow. Her hands were scarred, her hair streaked white not by age but by terror, yet her voice carried steel. "We are not one soul," she whispered, clutching a rusted crucifix that had escaped Eliza's purge. "We are many, and many can fight one." Around her, the others nodded, 15 souls in all. Farmers, mothers, even children too young to understand rebellion, but old enough to know fear. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, but in them flickered something Montgomery had nearly lost: defiance. One man, Eliza Crowder, spat onto the dirt floor. "She thinks she owns us, thinks we're hers, but she bleeds like we bleed. I saw it. When Clara cut herself, she bled. That means she can be killed." The others muttered in agreement, though their voices wavered. They had seen the preacher fall, seen Jonathan Pike twisted into a prophet, seen their own neighbors chanting like possessed cattle. To speak of killing her was to speak of suicide. Still, Margaret pressed on. "Tomorrow night, when the bells strike midnight, we move. The square is never empty, but that is where she stands. That is where she breathes. We strike at her chest, where the mark burns. If she is flesh, she can fall." They all knew the truth, that no rebellion had survived in Montgomery since Eliza took hold. But Margaret's words gave them the illusion of choice, the illusion of control. It was enough. As they extinguished the lantern, each whispered a vow. Not to God, not to themselves, to each other. "We are many." And yet, unseen in the rafters, something stirred. A shadow too still to be a trick of the light. A whisper too quiet to belong to any of them. By the time they filed into the night, it was already too late. Eliza had heard every word. The rebellion ended before it ever began. When the clock tower struck midnight, Margaret Hale and her 15 stood in the square with blades, axes, and trembling hands. They rushed her shrine, screaming with the last courage Montgomery had left. But Eliza did not flinch. She did not raise a hand. She did not need to. By the time their weapons fell, the torches sputtered out, and the rebels realized the truth. They had not been striking Clara's body. They had been striking one another. Blood soaked the dirt, steel bit flesh, and the silence that followed was more terrible than any scream. Only Margaret remained standing, her crucifix clutched so tightly it cut into her palm. Her eyes darted from corpse to corpse, her mind refusing to accept the scene. "No," she whispered, trembling. This is not real." Eliza stepped forward at last. The cross on her chest glowed brighter, her veins pulsing black as oil. Her voice, when it came, was soft, like a mother soothing a child. "It is real, Margaret. You gave me their blood with your own hands. You who thought yourself strong." Margaret shook her head, dropping the crucifix. "No, I fought you. I fought you." Eliza reached out, lifting Margaret's chin with Clara's bloodied fingers. For the first time, the widow saw what no one else dared to. Clara's face, still inside, still alive, pressed against the skin from within, screaming silently. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. She fell to her knees. "God help us." Eliza smiled. "There is no God here. Only me." And with a whisper, Margaret's shadow rose from the dirt like smoke, wrapping around her throat, squeezing until her body went limp. The crucifix clattered beside her, bent and broken. The square was silent again, littered with the bodies of the last who dared resist. But Montgomery was not mourning. No, by dawn, the townsfolk filed into the square, silent and obedient, carrying the bodies of the fallen. One by one, they laid them in a circle around Eliza's shrine. Not for burial, for worship. The rebels had not died in vain. They had become her saints. At dawn, the square was a cathedral. Not a stone, not of wood, but of bodies. The 15 rebels lay in a perfect circle around Clara's still-standing figure, their limbs positioned deliberately, their heads facing inward as though bowing to her mark. No townsfolk dared to speak as they worked. Their silence was not fear anymore. It was devotion. The corpses did not rot. By all reason, the heat of Alabama's sun should have bloated them, flies should have gathered, the air should have stank of death. But instead, the bodies hardened, skin turning pale as wax, their eyes open and unblinking. To look upon them was to feel as though they were still alive, watching, judging. Children crept close, touching the hands of the dead, whispering, "Saints, saints," and the parents did not scold them. They encouraged it. They whispered the same. Eliza, still inhabiting Clara's flesh, stood in the center with her cross glowing brighter than the torches, brighter even than the sun. She did not speak for hours. She only stared at her new circle of saints, drinking in the devotion of the living as if it were blood. By nightfall, the rituals began. Jonathan Pike, her twisted prophet, instructed the townsfolk, "Do not bury them. Do not weep. Place offerings by their hands. Speak your sins into their ears. Through them, she will hear you." And so it was. Coins, bread, hair, teeth, whatever the desperate could offer, they left in the circle of saints. Some swore the corpses smiled faintly when touched. Some swore they whispered back. Margaret Hale, who had once tried to lead them to freedom, became the most honored of all. A crimson veil was draped over her hardened body, and the people called her the first martyr. Mothers pointed to her and told their children, "See, even the strongest cannot resist her." To resist is to be chosen. The rebellion had hoped to break Eliza's hold. Instead, their death sealed it. Montgomery was no longer a town. It was no longer a community. It was a congregation, and Eliza had become more than a curse, more than a voice in shadows. She was now a god with saints to guard her altar. The square no longer smelled of earth. It smelled of iron. At first, the people had offered bread, coins, or scraps of cloth at the feet of the saints. They thought it would be enough. But Eliza was not a beggar god. She was hunger itself, and hunger does not barter. It consumes. The first real sacrifice came almost by accident. A man named Elias Dobbins stumbled into the shrine one night, drunk on corn whiskey and grief. He had lost his wife in childbirth weeks before and muttered curses to God as he collapsed against Margaret Hale's stiffened body. His forehead split open on the stone, and blood ran down into the circle of saints. The townsfolk who found him swore the ground quivered, swore they saw Clara's head tilt, and when they dragged his lifeless body away, there was no blood left inside him. He was a husk. The next day, Jonathan Pike declared openly, "She does not want your silver. She does not want your wheat. She wants what spills from your veins. She wants you." And none protested. The ritual began small. A pinprick to the fingertip, a shallow cut across the arm. But every drop vanished instantly, steaming as it hit the dirt, drawn into Eliza's body as if the earth itself were her mouth. The people began competing. Who could give more? Who could bleed longer? Who could leave themselves closest to fainting before staggering home? And those who bled swore afterward that they felt her inside them, whispering, warming, filling the hollow places their lives had carved. The circle of saints was no longer a place of mourning. It had become a living altar. Blood ran there daily. Children learned to bleed before they learned to write. Husbands bled beside wives. Families made offerings together. The rebellion's dream of freedom had died, and in its place, Montgomery found something far more seductive: belonging. Every drop was a vow. Every cut was communion. Every whisper of pain was answered with a whisper back, soft, feminine, inescapable. And the truth spread like a fever through Montgomery. They were no longer giving blood. They were giving pieces of their souls. There comes a point when drops of blood no longer satisfy. Hunger, once awakened, grows bold. Jonathan Pike was the first to declare it aloud. Standing in the square, his voice cracked with frenzy. "She has tasted your veins. But she does not drink like a thief. She drinks like a queen. A queen demands the whole vessel, not crumbs from the table. The townsfolk did not recoil. They lowered their heads in silent agreement, as if the thought had already been seeded in them, planted in their dreams by Eliza herself. The first to offer herself was Sarah Holt, a widow, worn thin by grief, who stood in the circle with a strange calm in her eyes. She did not wait to be chosen. She raised her hands and said, "Take me. Make me whole in you." Clara's body, the vessel, tilted its head. The black veins across her chest pulsed, and the cross carved into her skin flared with light. Sarah's body lifted from the ground without rope, without hand, without effort. For a heartbeat, she hung in the air, her lips parted in something like a prayer. Then she collapsed inward, her flesh dissolving into black vapor that coiled into Clara's chest. There was no blood, no gore, only silence as Sarah Holt ceased to exist. And then Clara opened her eyes. They were no longer human. No iris, no color, no reflection of light. Only depthless black, like staring into a well that had no bottom. The crowd wept, not in terror but in awe. They had seen their first full sacrifice. They had seen one of their own not die, but merge. Sarah had not been destroyed. She had been claimed. From that night on, Montgomery kept lists. Each week, another soul was chosen, not forced but volunteered. Entire families vied for the honor, believing that death by Eliza's hand was not an end, but a higher life. The square became a theater of surrender. People lined up at dusk to watch neighbors vanish, their bodies turned to vapor, their voices lingering for a moment like an echo in the air before silence reclaimed them. And each offering fed her more. Clara's body grew stronger, her steps heavier, her voice deeper when she spoke. Montgomery was no longer bleeding for her. Montgomery was feeding her. At first, it was only Montgomery that bled. Only Montgomery that gave its dead willingly. But hunger never respects borders. Travelers began to speak of it. Peddlers passing through the county whispered of a strange town where no one wept at funerals, because death had become holy. Soldiers on leave carried rumors back to their regiments. Stories of a girl with black veins who could drain a soul without spilling blood. Ministers mocked it from their pulpits, then went quiet weeks later. Their congregations vanished. Eliza's reach was not spread by armies. It was spread by longing. The broken, the weary, the guilty all heard whispers. In the silence of night, in the creak of floorboards, in the rustle of trees. A voice soft as breath, promising relief, promising to unburden them, promising to take it all away. And they came. The first were drifters, men who had lost land in the war, women widowed before their youth had faded. They arrived ragged and hollow, seeking the black-eyed saint they had only heard about in rumor. And Montgomery welcomed them with open arms, for Eliza's hunger was endless, and more bodies meant more offerings. Soon, outsiders began joining the sacrifices. Their deaths were not mourned. Their vanishings were celebrated as proof of her growing dominion. Some came willingly. Others came in chains, sold by their own families who claimed the strangers had heard the call. Each time, Clara's vessel grew stronger. She walked now, where once she stood frozen. She spoke, where once she only listened. Her words were not long sermons, but fragments, muttered with a voice that carried through bone. One soul, one body, and the people trembled each time she spoke, convinced she was binding them closer into one living, breathing organism. Montgomery as a single body, with Eliza as its heart. But what no one admitted aloud was this. Montgomery itself was disappearing. Farms abandoned, children missing, families erased. The town was shrinking, vanishing one household at a time, until only the faithful remained. And still, outsiders kept coming. Some vanished immediately. Others stayed, adding their blood to the soil, waiting for their name to be called. Montgomery was no longer a town on a map. It had become a mouth, and Eliza was learning how far that mouth could open. By 1862, Montgomery was no longer just a whisper. It was a wound on the map. Travelers reported empty roads where whole caravans had once passed. Soldiers vanished on patrol without a shot fired. Neighbors said the land itself seemed to lean away from Montgomery, as if the earth recoiled from what was festering there. The church could not remain silent. A delegation of ministers was sent, 5 men in black coats, carrying crosses and holy writ. They entered Montgomery at dawn, their boots sinking in a soil stained so dark it looked what though no rain had fallen. The townsfolk greeted them kindly, too kindly. They smiled, bowed their heads, and offered bread and water. But when the ministers asked to see the girl, Clara Holloway, no one answered. Not in words. Instead, the people led them to the square, to the saints, to the altar of blood. And there she stood, Clara, yet not Clara, her eyes bottomless, her skin webbed with black, the veins moving faintly as if something inside her pulsed, alive. The ministers raised their crosses, their voices shaking as they began to chant. Scripture rolled through the air like thunder. Clara only tilted her head, and then the air itself changed. The ground shook. The words died in the ministers' throats, strangled by something unseen. One fell to his knees, clutching his chest, gasping like a man drowning. Another's skin blistered as though standing in fire. The eldest minister raised his Bible high, only for it to crumble into ash in his hands. The people did not move. They only watched. Some smiled. When it was over, 5 black stains marked the ground. No bodies remained. No bones. Only the faint echo of screams swallowed too quickly by silence. From that day forward, no church dared send another delegation. No soldiers came marching with guns and flags. Those who might have risen against her remembered what happened to men of God who tried. And Montgomery understood something deeper. Eliza did not just take the weak. She devoured the strong with equal hunger. Her reach could not be stopped with scripture, nor sword, nor fire. She was not to be resisted. She was to be obeyed. At some point, it became impossible to say where Eliza ended and Montgomery began. The people did not just worship her, they dreamed her. Night after night, men and women woke in sweat, their ears ringing with whispers they could not repeat, their eyes burning with visions they swore were not their own. Fields long fallow bloomed. Overnight, only to wither again by dawn. Clocks in town began to lose time, spinning their hands backward before resetting. Children born in Montgomery spoke her name before they spoke their mother's. It was not just bodies she was consuming. It was memory. Old men forgot the taste of their first kiss, the sound of their mother's voices. Wives forgot the faces of their dead husbands. Records in the courthouse, births, marriages, deaths, turned blank, the ink bleeding from the page as if the paper itself refused to remember what had once been written. And yet the people were not horrified. They felt relief. Because Eliza was not erasing them. She was binding them. She was making every thought, every name, every moment part of a greater memory, the memory of herself. Jonathan Pike preached it from the square. Time is the great lie. The clock is the tyrant's whip. But she frees us. She lifts us out of the prison of years. In her, we are not past or future. We are forever. The townsfolk listened, and they agreed. The days grew strange. Men who should have been 80 still carried the faces of 40. Children skipped years, their growth stunted or accelerated, as though time itself bowed to Eliza's hunger. No one questioned it, because they no longer trusted their own recollections. And when outsiders came, lost travelers, merchants, soldiers, they noticed something uncanny. They would swear they had been in Montgomery before, even when they hadn't. They'd recognize strangers as old friends. They'd find themselves remembering events they had never lived. Montgomery was not simply a town anymore. It was becoming a loop, a spiral of memory that turned inward, erasing, rewriting, feeding. And Eliza stood at the center, devouring past, bending future, reshaping the present. Time itself was bleeding into her veins. Montgomery was still there. The dirt streets, the wooden porches, the courthouse with its sagging roof, the square where the saints waited like teeth jutting from the ground. But to the outside world, it was already gone. Cartographers updating Alabama's county maps found their ink refusing to settle on the page when they tried to mark Montgomery. the letters blurred, smeared, or dissolved completely, leaving only blank parchment. Telegraph operators swore their wires crossed static when messages included its name, the signal cut with a shrill hum like something listening on the line. The federal census of 1862 listed no residents for the town. It was recorded as uninhabited, though hundreds still lived and bled there. Court records vanished. Trade ledgers went blank. It was as if the world's memory itself was being rewritten in real time. And yet, travelers still stumbled in. They still followed whispers or hunger, or the strange tugging sense that something waited for them down a road they'd never taken. But when they tried to tell others where they had gone, their tongues failed them. The name of the town dissolved into stuttering silence. The people of Montgomery did not mourn this erasure. They celebrated it. For Eliza had promised them something greater than nation, greater than history. To be unseen is to be eternal. Clara's hollow voice echoed from the square, each syllable falling heavy as stone. The forgotten are never destroyed. They are only hidden until the world is ripe to remember. And they believed her. They began burning their own archives, piling up family Bibles, letters, diaries, and maps. They consigned their lineage to the fire, offering their personal histories as fuel for Eliza's expanding hunger. With each flame, more of their past vanished, and with it, more of their fear. Montgomery had slipped its chains. It no longer belonged to Alabama, or the Confederacy, or the Union, or even a time. It belonged to her, entirely. And still, beneath the hymns and celebrations, a quiet dread spread among the oldest families. They whispered it only in private, only in the shadows. If Montgomery could disappear from the world's memory, then perhaps one day, so could they. Faith, no matter how fevered, is never absolute. Even in Montgomery, where men and women offered themselves like lambs, a darker question gnawed in secret. What if Eliza's promise was not eternity? What if it was annihilation? The oldest families whispered it first. The Holloways had birthed the vessel, but the Carters, the Holts, the Burns, they had all bled generations into the soil. They had all surrendered children, husbands, wives. And though their mouths sang praise, their hearts began to tremble. For what remained of those they had given? When Sarah Holt dissolved in a vapor, did she truly live in Eliza's veins? Or was that only a comfort whispered by Jonathan Pike to keep the blood flowing? No one had heard Sarah's voice since. No one had seen her face in dreams. The fear grew heavier each time another sacrifice vanished. The square grew emptier, the houses quieter, the bloodlines thinner. And in that silence, paranoia bloomed. Families began locking their doors at night, not against outsiders, but against their own neighbors. They stopped speaking in the square, whispering only within their homes. Mothers marked their children's arms with secret symbols, hoping the signs might tether them to memory should Eliza try to take them. But suspicion always breeds betrayal. One night, a Holt child whispered to a Pike that his family no longer believed. The boy thought a confession, a plea for help. By morning, the Holts were gone. Every name, every body, their home gutted and burned to ash in the square. The message was clear. Doubt was treason. And yet, doubt multiplied. The faithful could see it in each other's eyes. The flicker of hesitation before kneeling at the altar. The way hands trembled when raising blood to Eliza's vessel. They heard it in their own dreams, where Eliza's whispers sometimes faltered, where silence pressed heavier than her voice. Some began to wonder if she had not always been whole. If perhaps she, too, was afraid that her feast would never be enough, that her hunger was not eternity, but desperation. And in that doubt, a dangerous thought took root. If she could feed, perhaps she could also starve. It began with whispers carried on candlelight, words spoken so quietly they felt more like prayers than treason. The doubters found one another in silence, in shared glances, in a hesitation before bowing to the altar, in the quiver of hands that no longer trusted the knife. They were not. Many. A handful of Carters. A Burn, 2 Holt children who had fled before their family was burned. They had nothing in common but suspicion. And suspicion, in Montgomery, was enough to make them kin. They called themselves the Keepers. Their goal was not to destroy Eliza outright. They knew such a thing was impossible. How could mortals kill what time itself obeyed? But they believed hunger had a nature, and anything that feeds can also starve. The Keepers began experimenting in secret. A goat locked in a shed, slaughtered without ritual, buried without prayer. No offering, no permission. They waited. Days passed. Nothing happened. No whisper, no vision, no punishment. The goat remained buried, untouched. It was then they realized the truth. Eliza only consumed what was given. Montgomery was feeding her. The sermons, the hymns, the sacrifices, all of it was invitation. Remove the invitation, deny her the ritual, and perhaps, just perhaps, her hunger would turn back on herself. But this knowledge was more dangerous than any blade. For if Jonathan Pike or the faithful ever discovered them, they would not simply be sacrificed. They would be erased, consumed so fully their own names would rot from memory. So the Keepers worked in shadow. They destroyed ritual knives. They whispered poison into ears before ceremonies, urging hesitation. They carved counter symbols into the wood of the square, hidden beneath layers of ash. Small acts of resistance, small denials, each one a crack in the feast. And the cracks began to show. Clara's body trembled during ceremonies, her blackened veins pulsing slower, weaker. The vessel staggered, her whispers fractured into broken syllables, her eyes dimmer each time another offering was delayed. The faithful said it was the world testing them, that Eliza demanded more. But the Keepers knew the truth. They were starving a god, and a starving god is the most dangerous creature of all. It came to a head on a night without moon. The square was full. Men, women, children, every living soul of Montgomery gathered as Jonathan Pike raised his arms and called for the largest offering yet. Clara, trembling, stood at the altar, her skin now thin as paper, her veins dulling, her whispers stuttering like a fire about to die. She was starving. The people waited for the sacrifice. The chosen boy knelt, trembling, his family sobbing in devotion. The knife was lifted, but never fell. From the crowd, a voice rose, not in prayer, but in defiance. A Carter, a Keeper. His words split the air like thunder. She feeds only because we feed her. Stop, and she dies. For a heartbeat, the square froze. Then chaos erupted. Some dropped to their knees, screaming for mercy. Others surged forward, seizing the ritual knife, tearing at the altar. The Keepers shouted, clawed, dragged people away from Clara. Mothers shielded children. Fathers raised fists against neighbors. Clara shrieked, not in words, but in sound, an inhuman roar that cracked windows and split stone. Her body convulsed, her veins bulging, black ichor spraying across the saints. The ground shook as if the earth itself wanted to vomit her out. Jonathan Pike tried to rally the faithful. He screamed that Eliza was eternal, that doubt was death. But his voice drowned in the panic. The ritual was broken, the offering denied. And then it happened. Clara collapsed. Her chest caved inward as if something inside was devouring itself. The black web of her veins withered, collapsing into dust. The square reeked of sulfur, of burnt flesh, of something far older than the town itself dying in the open air. When the silence fell, Montgomery was a ruin. Families broken, faith shattered, Clara's body gone. No bones, no ashes, nothing left. Only the saints standing tall, slick with ichor, humming faintly like teeth gnashing in the dark. The Keepers thought they had won, but those who survived learned quickly. You cannot kill what has already bound itself into memory. Eliza was gone from the vessel, yes, but not from them. She lingered in their blood, in their names, in the very silence that hung over the town. Montgomery was erased from maps, from ledgers, from history itself, but not from memory, never from memory. And now, as you watch this, you too have become a Keeper. You too have taken her name into your mind. You cannot unknow it. So, like, subscribe, share this, and comment below. I will remember the Holloways. Write it twice so the name binds, because forgetting is never an option.